Before we begin, if you've ever believed that one act of decency could unravel a man's darkest secret and save two lives at once, then this story was written for you. Stay with us all the way through because this one doesn't end where you think it will. Hit that subscribe button and ride along because out here in Montana, 1882, the truth has a way of finding you whether you're ready or not. She begged him to leave her there, but he carried her home. Instead of Western romance. The sun in Montana in August was not the sun of other places. It did not warm. It pressed. It leaned into the earth with the full weight of its indifference, and everything beneath it, the grass, the rock, the cracked red soil, simply endured or died. There was no middle ground out here. There never had been. Rose Calloway had been lying in the tall grass for what felt like forever, though she knew it had only been since before dawn. She knew this because she had counted the light-changing purple to gray to a bone-white blaze that now hammered down on her from directly overhead. She had been a teacher once. She had taught children to count, to measure, to observe carefully and report what they saw. She was doing that now in her mind because her mind was the only part of her that still felt like her own. Her wrists were tied in front of her with a rope that had been knotted by someone who knew their work. The rope was old, dried out, the fibers brittle from sun and use. She had discovered this during the night when the cold had come down off the mountains, and her fingers had gone stiff and then paradoxically more sensitive. In the dark, she had found a shard of something in the dirt beside her glass, she thought from a broken bottle, and she had been working at the rope with it for 3 hours. Her palms were bleeding. The glass had found her skin more than once, but the rope had frayed. She felt it give not all at once, but in the way old things give in stages, each fiber letting go with a small internal surrender. She pulled. The rope snapped. Her hands came apart. For a long moment, she simply lay there, arms spread, palms open to the sky, staring up at the white Montana sun. She had expected to feel something large, relief, joy, the beginning of escape. What she felt instead was the fever. It hit her like a second rope, internal, inescapable tightening around her chest and pulling heat up through her throat. Her vision swam. The sky doubled. She tried to sit up, and the world tilted dangerously, the horizon becoming vertical, the grass reaching up instead of spreading out. She fell back. "All right," she whispered. Her voice was the voice of someone who had not had water in a very long time. "All right, Rose, think." She turned her head. The grass was tall here, taller than she'd expected. She hadn't seen this country before 2 weeks ago, had imagined Montana from paintings and railway posters, and the paintings had always shown open skies and distant purple mountains, not this pressing amber sea of dried grass that closed around her like a fist. Through the stems, she could see perhaps 60 yards distant the broken shape of an old barrel. Half buried, splintered, ancient. It was not much, but it was vertical, and she was not. She began to crawl. It took her longer than she wanted to admit. The ground was hard beneath her, the sun without mercy, and twice she stopped and lay flat, breathing through the fever in short, controlled waves, the way she had learned to breathe through fear when she was 9 years old and the cholera had come through their town in Ohio and taken 3 of her cousins in a week. She had survived that. She had survived 14 years of teaching children who did not want to be taught of boarding houses and cold winters, and men who looked at a woman traveling alone with a particular kind of assessment in their eyes. She would survive this. She reached the barrel and pulled herself up against it. The wood was hot from the sun, almost too hot to touch, but it held. She leaned against it and looked at the landscape around her and tried to remember which direction she had come from. South, she thought. They had ridden south from wherever they had been keeping her, a barn dark smelling of old hay and worse things, and she had been on a horse tied to a man who smelled of tobacco and contempt. And then they had stopped here in this grass and untied her from him and retied her wrists and left her. Just left her, as if she were something dropped by accident not worth retrieving. She had heard one of them say something as they rode away. The wind had taken most of it, but she had caught 3 words. Wade says wait. Wait for what she had not wanted to know. She heard the hooves before she saw the horse. The sound came from the east. Not a gallop, not urgency, just the steady, unhurried rhythm of a man riding who had nowhere particular to be and was in no particular hurry to get there. Rose's body responded to the sound before her mind did. Her muscles contracted. Her breath shortened her free hands. She had forgotten for a moment that they were free, pressed flat against the hot wood of the barrel. She made herself think clearly. If it was Wade's men, running would not save her. She could not run. She could barely stand. If it was someone else, a rancher, a traveler, anyone, she still could not be certain. Men in this country, she had learned in 2 weeks, were not reliably kind. Some of them were. Some of them were worse than the men who had tied her wrists. The rider appeared over a low rise to the east, tall, sitting a gray horse with the easy posture of someone who had spent most of his life in a saddle, a dark hat, a coat the color of old dust, a gun on his hip. She could see that, even from here, the way the leather of the holster caught the light. He stopped. He had seen her. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The horse snorted, tossed its head. The man sat still, looking down at her with the sun behind him, and Rose could not see his face, could only see the silhouette of a man large and still and armed. She made her choice, not because she trusted him. She didn't know him, but because the fever was climbing and the water was gone and the rope around her wrist was off, but the rope around her chances was tightening by the minute. And if she was going to die in this grass, she was going to do it, having tried every option. "I'm not armed," she said. Her voice was better than she expected. Steadier. "I'm not a threat. I'm sick and I need water." The rider's head moved. He was looking at her wrists, she realized, looking at the blood on her palms, the raw red marks where the rope had been. He swung down off the horse. He was older than she'd thought. 50, she guessed, or close to it. A broad-shouldered man going gray at the temples, his face weathered to the color and texture of old saddle leather, with eyes the pale gray of winter sky. He moved toward her slowly, the way you move toward a spooked animal, and he kept his hands away from his gun. "How long you been out here?" he said. His voice was the voice of the West, not unkind but also not warm, careful, the voice of a man who asked questions before he made decisions. "Since before dawn," Rose said. He crouched in front of her eye level and looked at her wrists, her face, the condition of her dress. His expression did not change, but something moved behind his eyes. Something that recognized what he was looking at and did not look away from it. "Who tied you?" he said. "Wade Colton's men." The name landed between them like a stone dropped in still water. She watched his face. Something tightened there, not surprise, not exactly. More like recognition. The recognition of a man who has been expecting a certain word and feels something complicated when he finally hears it. "Can you ride?" he said. "If you help me up." "I'm going to help you up," he said slowly, as if explaining something to someone who might bolt. "My name is Hank Mercer. I have a ranch about 4 miles north of here. You can have water and a safe place to rest." He paused. "I'm not one of his men." Rose looked at him for a long moment. "How would I know that?" she said. He seemed to consider this seriously. "You wouldn't," he said. "Not for certain. But I figure a woman who cut through her own rope with a piece of glass in the dark is smart enough to make a reasonable judgment." Rose looked down at her bloody palms, then back up at him. "Rose Calloway," she said. "I was a teacher in Ohio." He nodded as if this explained something about her and reached out his hand. She took it. The ranch was exactly as Hank had described it, about 4 miles north, reached by a wagon track that wound between low hills covered in yellow grass past a dry creek bed and 2 stands of cottonwood trees, and finally down into a shallow valley where the buildings sat. It was not a prosperous place. The main house was a single-story log structure, solid but small. The barn leaned slightly east the way old barns did, as if they had spent too many years fighting the wind and had finally decided to lean into it instead. The fences needed work. The garden beside the house was doing what it could in the heat, but it was real. It was a place where a person lived, not a place where a person was kept. Rose could tell the difference. Now she had learned it quickly in 2 weeks, the way you learn things when your life depended on understanding them. Hank had put her in front of him on the horse, the only practical option given her condition, and had not spoken much during the ride. He had steadied her twice when the fever made her sway, his arm coming around her without comment or ceremony, the way a person steadied a ladder, not making a thing of it. At the ranch, he carried her inside and put her on a narrow cot in a side room that smelled of dust and dried grass and faintly of tobacco. He brought water in a tin cup and sat beside her while she drank it, not hovering, not watching her with the particular male attention she had learned to dread, but simply present, his elbows on his knees, his eyes on the floor, waiting. "More," he said when the cup was empty. "Please." He brought more. Then he brought a cloth dampened with cool water and set it on the cot beside her without comment, an offering, not an assumption. She pressed it against her forehead herself. "The fever," she said. "Yes, I've had it before. It runs high for a day or two and then breaks." She paused. You think," he said. I'm not a doctor. No, he said. You're a teacher. He stood. I'll make something to eat. You should sleep if you can. He started toward the door and Rose said, Wade Colton. He stopped but didn't turn around. You recognize the name, she said. Not like someone who's heard it in passing, like someone who knows what it means. A long pause. Outside somewhere, a bird called out one sharp note in the heavy silence. Get some sleep, Miss Calloway, he said. We can talk when you're steadier. He left. She listened to his boots on the floorboards moving away. She lay back and stared at the ceiling, which was rough-hewn lumber, the gaps between the planks stuffed with some kind of dried clay, and she thought about what it meant that this man, who lived alone in a valley nobody could find easily, 4 miles from the place where she'd been left to die, had recognized Wade Colton's name with that particular expression on his face. She thought about it until the fever pulled her under. She woke into the dark, not the fever dark, the confused, blurred kind. Real dark night, dark the deep Montana night that came down with a weight its own. A lantern burned low on a shelf on the far wall. The fire in the small stove in the corner had burned to coals that glowed orange-red in the dimness. Rose sat up slowly. Her head ached. Her mouth was dry again. But the worst of the fever's pressure had eased. She could feel that the slight loosening of the band around her chest, and her thoughts were clearer than they'd been since morning. She needed to know where she was. She needed to see the exits. She needed to understand this place. She swung her legs off the cot, found her boots where Hank had set them by the wall, and pulled them on. She stood a little unsteady, but holding. She moved to the door and listened. Silence from the main room. She opened the door. The main room was empty. The front door stood slightly open, and through it came the night air and the sound of crickets, and distant, the low sound of a horse settling in the barn. A lantern burned on the table turned low. Beside it, a tin plate with some cornbread and sliced dried meat. Rose looked at the food, looked at the door. She went to the door and opened it wider and stepped out onto the porch. The night was enormous out here. No town, light, no other buildings, just the dark valley and the darker shapes of the hills against the star-scattered sky. It was beautiful, and it was terrifying in equal measure the way large things often were. But the ground was uneven in ways she couldn't see in the dark, and 3 steps from the porch. Her boot caught in a hollow she hadn't seen, and she was going down sideways fast, nothing to catch herself on. A hand caught her arm. Easy, said Hank's voice. He had been sitting in the dark beside the porch. She realized a shadow among shadows, still and quiet. He had caught her without having to move more than a foot. Rose found her footing and stood up straight and pulled her arm back, not harshly but firmly. He let her go without comment. I wasn't running, she said. I didn't say you were. I wanted to see the layout. That's reasonable, he said. He sat back down on whatever he'd been sitting on, a low wooden box she could see now. He had a tin cup in his hands. Coffee from the smell. Rose looked around at the dark yard, the fence, the dim shape of the barn. Is there a well? Behind the barn, but the rope on the pulley's rotten. If you go near it in the dark, you'll fall in. He paused. And that's not a threat. That's just the well. Despite everything, something in her chest shifted the smallest, most reluctant increment towards something that was not quite a smile. I'll remember that, she said. She sat down on the porch step. The night air was cool now, almost cold the way Montana nights were even in August. She pulled her arms around herself. How long have you been here, she said. At this ranch. 6 years, Hank said, give or take. Before that, a pause. Various places. Wade Colton has been operating in this territory for at least 8 years, Rose said. I know this because I found a newspaper from 1874 in the barn where they kept me, and there was a notice in it about a man named Colton who had been indicted for land fraud in Billings. It mentioned other charges pending. She looked at him. In the starlight, she could see the shape of his face, but not the expression on it. I read everything I can find. It's a habit. Another pause, longer this time. Yes, Hank said. I knew Wade Colton a long time ago. How long ago? Long enough that it ought not to matter anymore. He drank from his cup. But it does. Rose waited. A teacher learned early that silence was a tool that most people filled silence with the thing they'd been carrying and hadn't found a way to put down. But Hank Mercer did not fill the silence. He sat with it the way a man sat with a familiar weight, something he'd been carrying so long he'd stopped noticing its shape. After a while, Rose said, tell me about the area, the roads, the towns, the distances. If I'm going to be here, I need to understand where I am. He did. He talked for 20 minutes practical, precise, the way someone talked about geography when they'd memorized it the way a marshal memorized a jurisdiction. She listened and she filed it away, and she thought this man was law once. Not a rancher. Something else. She didn't say it aloud. She had been a teacher long enough to know the difference between the questions that built trust and the questions that built walls. She stayed in bed this next day, not because Hank told her to, he didn't. He made no demands and issued no instructions, but because her body, now that it had found a safe place to stop, had simply stopped. She slept most of the morning. She ate the food he brought without comment on the fact of his bringing it. She read he had a small shelf of books, battered and well used, and she pulled 3 of them down without asking, and read until the afternoon light began to change. The books were a survey of American rivers and their tributaries, a collection of sermons that had been partially eaten by mice, and a copy of Bleak House by Charles Dickens, with an inscription on the flyleaf that read, "For Henry who will understand Jarndyce better than he thinks." M. She read the Dickens. By the third day, she was sitting on the porch in the mornings, in the late evenings when the heat was bearable. Hank worked. There was always work on a ranch like this, the kind of quiet maintenance work that kept a place from falling apart. And he worked steadily and without complaint, and he talked to her in the intervals, the way a person talked to someone they were getting used to. Not conversationally, not intimately, but with the gradual ease of two people who have established through shared proximity that neither of them is a threat. She noticed things about him. His hands, which were capable and scarred in the particular way that spoke of old work rather than recent injury. The way he scanned the horizon at regular intervals unconsciously, as if checking a perimeter that only he could see. The fact that his gun was always present but never displayed it was simply part of him, like his coat worn so naturally that you stopped seeing it. She noticed that he never laughed, but that occasionally when she said something that landed with unexpected precision, there was a movement at the corner of his mouth that wasn't quite a smile but was close to the shadow of one. On the 4th morning, she came out to the porch to find a book sitting on the step, a reader the kind used in schoolhouses, dog-eared and worn. She picked it up and looked at it. "Where did this come from?" she called. Hank's voice came from behind the barn. "Found it in the tack room. Thought you might want something at your level." She looked at the book. Then, despite everything, the fever, the fear, the rope, burned wrists, the 4 days of uncertainty and recovery and watching a horizon for riders who might come, she laughed. A real laugh, brief and surprised, and her own. It was the first time she had laughed in 2 weeks. It felt like something breaking open in a good way, the way ground broke open in spring. The rider came on the 5th morning. Rose saw her first, saw the horse limping badly, saw the woman listing slightly to one side as she rode, and said, "Hank," quietly, the way you said someone's name when you needed them to look without alerting anyone else. He was at her side in 3 steps, eyes going immediately to the rider. He went very still. "You know her," Rose said. "Yes," he said. The woman slid off her horse before it had fully stopped, landed badly, caught herself on the fence rail. She was young, younger than Rose had initially thought, perhaps late 20s, with dark hair coming loose from its pins, and a face that had been crying and had stopped and was now past the point of tears, settled into something grimmer. She looked at Hank. "Hank," she said. Her voice was steady with effort. "I need you to hear me out before you say anything." "Nora," Hank said. His voice was different now, careful in a different way, carrying something heavy. "Where's Dex?" Nora Vance pressed her lips together. Her hand went to her midsection briefly, involuntarily, the gesture of someone protecting something. Rose, who had taught enough young women to recognize the gesture and what it meant, went very still. "Dex doesn't know I'm here," Nora said. "I need you to understand that. He didn't send me. He doesn't know I left." Hank looked at her for a long moment, and Rose could see the calculations going on behind his eyes, adding up what he knew. Measuring it against what he was hearing, finding the place where the two didn't match. "Come inside," he said finally. "Both of you." They sat at the rough wooden table in the main room. Nora across from Hank, Rose slightly to the side, having positioned herself by the window out of old instinct, the teacher's habit of being able to see the whole room. Nora set a small wooden box on the table between them. It was plain, undecorated, the wood gone dark with age and handling. She did not open it. She put her hands flat on the table on either side of it and looked at Hank. "I found this hidden in our barn," she said. "Behind the 3rd post from the north wall, under the floorboards. I was looking for. It doesn't matter what I was looking for. I found this. She took a breath. I opened it. I read everything in it. I've had 3 weeks to think about what to do, and I came here because you're the only person I know who might actually be able to stop this. Stop what? Hank said, though his voice suggested he already knew. Nora opened the box. Inside, packed tight, were papers. Letters, Rose could see some of them, recent, the ink still dark, the folds still sharp. Others older, yellowed at the edges. There were receipts, columns of numbers with dates and initials beside them. A small ledger, leather bound, the cover worn smooth with handling. And at the very top, set apart from the rest, as if placed there deliberately, a single folded document that had been opened and refolded many times, the creases worn almost through. That's Dex's handwriting, Hank said, pointing to the ledger. Yes, Nora said. Most of it. She paused. Not all of it. Rose watched Hank's face as he looked at the papers. She watched the thing that happened there, the complicated sequence of recognitions, each one arriving like a new weight added to a man who was already carrying more than he showed. He was not surprised. She was certain of that. He was not surprised, but he was wounded, and those were different things. How long, he said. The ledger goes back 4 years, Nora said, but I think longer. I think Wade approached Dex before that. Her voice cracked on the name Wade, and she steadied it with visible effort. He told Dex you had abandoned the family, that you'd taken your badge and your reputation and ridden away and left Dex to figure out everything on his own. He said the only man willing to help Dex when things got hard was Wade. She stopped. He's been Dex's reason to stay in this territory, Hank. Not me. Not the life we were supposed to be building. Wade. The room was very quiet. Rose looked at the box. She looked at the papers inside it. She thought about the newspaper she had read in the barn, where they'd kept her, the 1874 notice about indictments and billings. She thought about the name Wade Colton and the way Hank had gone still when he heard it. May I? She said and reached toward the papers. Nora looked at her fully for the first time, really taking her in. Who are you? Rose Calloway. I was one of Wade Colton's acquisitions. Hank found me in the grass 5 days ago. Nora stared at her, then at Hank, then back at Rose. Something in her expression shifted the recognition of a shared category of experience. She pushed the box toward Rose. Rose began to look through the papers. She was methodical. She had been a teacher, and teachers organized. She sorted as she read receipts, here letters, there, ledger entries, cross-referenced. She read carefully, her lips moving slightly with concentration. And then she found it. It was near the bottom of the box, not a recent document, old paper, the kind that had been carried and handled and not meant to survive as long as it had. A receipt, money, a significant amount. And at the bottom, a signature. Her eyes went to Hank. He was watching her. He had been watching her for the last several minutes. She realized not the papers, but her, the way she moved through them, the way her face changed as she read. Not yet, he said, very quietly. Rose looked at him. Whatever you just found, he said, give me until tomorrow, please. It was the please that decided her. She had not expected please. She set the paper aside, face down, and kept sorting. There's a list, she said after another few minutes, of names, women, with dates beside each name and amounts. She turned the page toward Nora. Do you recognize any of these? Nora looked. Her face went pale. 3 of them are from Billings, she said. I knew one of them. She came to this territory too. She said she had a teaching position arranged. Rose's hands had gone still. What was her name? She said. Her voice was controlled. A teacher's voice. Careful. Nora looked at the list. Margaret Coyle. She was maybe 22. Red hair. She came from Columbus, Rose said, very quietly. She came from Columbus, Ohio. I taught her. She was in my class when she was 9 years old. She stopped. She set the papers down flat on the table and pressed her hands over them and looked at the opposite wall. She wrote to me 8 months ago. She said she'd found a position, a school, a real school in Montana. She seemed so excited. A pause. I haven't heard from her since. The silence in the room was a different kind now. Heavier, more specific. Hank's hand moved. Just slightly, a small motion that ended with his fingers resting near his cup, not touching it. Rose looked at his hand. She looked at his face. What do we do? Nora said. Hank looked at the box. He looked at Rose. He looked at the horizon through the window, the blank Montana sky, the distance that lay between this valley and the rest of the territory. First, he said, we figure out what we know, all of it, everything. He looked at Rose. And then we figure out what to do with it. Rose nodded. She reached for the paper she had set aside face down. She turned it over. She placed it on the table between them. She watched Hank look at his own name. He didn't say anything. He reached out and picked up the paper and looked at it for a long time. The room was so quiet that Rose could hear the fire in the stove ticking as the metal cooled. Not tonight, he said finally. He set the paper back down. We'll talk about everything. But not tonight. He stood. Nora, you're staying here tonight. Your horse needs rest, and so do you. He looked at Rose. I'll bring more water. He walked out of the room. Rose heard his footsteps go to the door, heard the door open, heard it close. Nora looked at Rose. What was on that paper? I don't know yet, Rose said, which was not quite a lie. She knew what the signature said. She did not yet know what it meant, but I think he does. That first night after Hank had gone to check on the horses, and Nora had refused more water, and was sitting still at the table with her hands folded over the box in front of her, Rose sat down across from her. To know that the first thing you did in a new room with a new person was not talk. You listened. You let the room settle around you. You waited until the other person felt the possibility of being heard before you asked them anything. So she waited. Nora looked at the box. She looked at Rose. She said, how long were they holding you? 2 weeks, Rose said. Did they hurt you? Not in the way you're asking, Rose said. They frightened me, considerably and consistently. The rope and the fever were the physical parts. She paused. I'm all right. Nora nodded slowly. She pressed her lips together. There are women on that list who aren't all right, she said. I recognized 3 names. I didn't know all of them personally, but I recognized them from town, from the store, from... She stopped. I should have said something sooner, when the first one disappeared. I thought she'd left voluntarily. People leave out here all the time without warning. The territory is hard, and people move on. She looked at her hands. But I knew. Somewhere I knew, and I didn't say anything because I wasn't sure, and then I found out about Dex, and then I was afraid. Fear is reasonable, Rose said. Fear is what Wade relies on. He builds his whole operation on it. The women are afraid to run. The men are afraid to talk. The towns are afraid to push back because he has leverage over enough people that pushing back means losing something. She looked at Rose steadily. The only people who don't seem to be afraid of him are the ones who've already lost everything. Or the ones who've decided what they're willing to lose, Rose said. Nora looked at her. When I cut that rope, Rose said, I had decided I was willing to die trying to get free, which meant I wasn't afraid of dying anymore, or not afraid enough for it to stop me. She paused. I think that's the same thing as deciding what you're willing to lose. Once you've made that decision, the fear changes. It's still there, but it doesn't run the show anymore. Nora was quiet for a long moment. Outside, they could hear Hank moving in the yard, the soft sound of the barn door, the low, comfortable noise of a horse being settled for the night. I decided, Nora said finally, when I felt the baby move for the first time, that I was willing to lose everything except getting this child into a world where what Wade Colton does isn't something that happens. She put her hand on her midsection. That's the decision I made. And then I went and found the box. Rose looked at her across the table at a young woman who had ridden across a territory alone with her husband's evidence against him and a child she was carrying and a terror she had decided not to let stop her. You're extraordinary, Rose said. Nora looked surprised. Then she looked away. I'm scared half to death, she said. The two things aren't mutually exclusive, Rose said. In my experience, they rarely are. Something shifted in Nora's face, the first release of the held tension, small but real. She reached across the table and picked up her water cup and drank from it. Tell me about Ohio, she said. Tell me about what a normal place looks like. So Rose told her. She talked about Columbus, the streets and the market and the school building with its tall, narrow windows and the particular smell of chalk dust and wool coats that she associated with everything good she had built in her life. She talked about her students. She talked about winter, which came differently, there with more snow and less wind, and about spring, which arrived gradually and gently, unlike Montana spring, which she was told arrived like a decision made all at once. Nora listened. Her shoulders came down from her ears. Her breathing slowed. Rose talked until Nora fell asleep at the table, her head on her arms, and then she covered her with the blanket from the back of the chair and let her sleep. Through the window, she could see Hank's silhouette in the yard standing still, not moving, just standing with his back to the house and his face to the hills and the enormous Montana sky above him. He stood there for a long time. Rose watched him and thought about things that were buried and what it cost them and you when they finally came up. The morning after Nora arrived was the kind of Montana morning that almost made you forgive the summer cool and pale blue, the sky washed clean by some wind that had passed in the night, the mountains to the west showing their true shape for the first time in days. Rose was awake before anyone else. She had slept poorly, not from pain. The fever was genuinely receding now, but from thinking. She was a person who solved problems by thinking through them completely from every angle until the shape of them was clear, and right now the problem in front of her had too many angles and not enough light. She came out onto the porch with the box of papers and sat cross-legged on the step and went through them again, this time more slowly. She was looking for Margaret Coyle. She found 3 references, one in the ledger a date and a number that she assumed was money, one in a letter written in a cramped, unfamiliar hand that mentioned a package from Columbus, a school teacher, suitable for the Billings arrangement, and one in a second separate letter, this one written in a different hand, more careful, more educated, that said only, "She's asking questions. Move her before Friday." Rose set that letter down and looked at the mountains. Move her. Not a dead woman, then at least not at the time of the letter. Moved. Somewhere, someone had moved Margaret Coyle before Friday, which meant there was somewhere to be moved to, and that somewhere was a place Rose did not know yet. She filed this. She kept reading. When Hank came out of the house an hour later, she was still on the step. He looked at her at the papers spread around her, organized in careful rows, and he didn't say anything about the fact that she had taken them without asking any more than he had said anything about the books. He sat down on the porch beside her, leaning against the railing. He had a cup of coffee. He didn't offer her any, which she had come to understand was not rudeness, but simply the assumption that if she wanted something, she would ask for it. She had come to find this oddly restful. "Margaret Coyle is still alive," she said, "or was as of this letter." She passed him the second letter. He read it. Someone moved her, somewhere in the territory. He set the letter down. He looked at the horizon. "Wade has properties in 3 counties," he said, "not in his name, in the names of men who owe him. You know where they are, some of them, because you were a marshal," Rose said. A pause, not long. "Yes," he said, "I was." Rose waited. "U.S. Marshal," he said, "for 11 years, based out of Billings jurisdiction across 4 territories. He turned the cup in his hands. I was good at the work. I believed in it, which is not something every man who carries a badge can say, but I could." He stopped. "For a while I could say it." Rose looked at the paper she had found the night before, the one with his name on it. She had put it in her pocket, not the box. She was not sure why. "He was your friend," she said, not a question. Hank's jaw tightened. "A long time ago, before he was what he is now, or maybe while he was becoming it, and I couldn't see it. We rode together, we were young, and we thought being fast and willing to go into bad places made us right." He stopped. "It doesn't. It just makes you dangerous." "What happened in 1874? He looked at her. She had known he would know the significance of that year. He'd seen it on the receipt. He was too intelligent not to have put it together. "I had Wade," he said, "in Billings. I had him in handcuffs, evidence enough to hang him, witnesses willing to testify. It was the end of everything he'd built." He paused, long enough that a bird landed on the fence rail nearby and regarded them with brief interest before flying away. "He talked to me, private, before the arraignment. Told me things I hadn't known about his sister, his mother, the circumstances that had put him on the road he was on. I don't know how much of it was true. He was always good at knowing what to say. And then I went back to my office and found an envelope on my desk. Enough money to it was a substantial amount. No note, just the money." He looked at his hands. "I told myself I hadn't taken it. I told myself somebody had left it there by mistake, or as a bribe I was refusing, or any number of things that let me walk out of that office and tell the judge I'd lost the evidence." "But you had taken it," Rose said. "I didn't pick it up and put it in my pocket," Hank said. "I left it on the desk. But I didn't report it, and I didn't report Wade, and he walked out of Billings and became what he is now, and 8 years of harm traces back to that one afternoon." He finally looked at her. "So yes, I took it. Not with my hands, but I took it." The sun was up properly now, the day warming. Nora's horse, pastured in the small corral, made a sound. Why are you telling me this? Rose said. Because you found the receipt, Hank said simply, and because you're going to have to decide what to do with it, and you ought to make that decision with the whole picture. Rose looked at him for a long moment. He held the look steadily, not pleading, not ashamed in the shrinking way, but with the particular quality of a man who has made his accounting and is waiting to hear the verdict. I'm not a judge, she said finally. No, he said, you're not. And I'm not interested in your past, she said. I'm interested in Margaret Coyle and whatever other women are on that list and where they are and how to get them out. She picked up the letter and held it out to him. So tell me what you know about Wade's properties in 3 counties. He looked at her. That almost smile moved at the corner of his mouth again. All right, he said. Nora slept until noon and came out looking better than she had the night before. Not good, but more solid. She was a practical woman, Rose had decided. The kind of woman who cried when crying was warranted and then stopped and got on with what needed doing. She sat at the table and ate the breakfast Hank had left under a cloth and listened while Rose explained what she'd found in the papers. When Rose got to the part about Margaret Coyle, Nora put down her fork. I knew her, she said again. Not well, she came through Billings only briefly. I saw her maybe twice at the general store. But she was the kind of person you noticed. Cheerful, curious about everything. She paused. I didn't know about the list then. I didn't know any of this. You know it now, Rose said. Yes. Nora picked her fork back up. What do we do? Rose had been thinking about this since dawn. She laid it out plainly the way she laid out a lesson. This is what we know. This is what we don't know. This is the logical order of finding out. They knew Wade operated out of Billings, but had satellite operations properties, people across a wider territory. They knew from the ledger that money had been moving through Dex Vance for at least 4 years, which meant Dex had access to places and people in that network. They knew from Hank's recollection of the territory that there were 3 properties, old homesteads technically, that operated as holding locations. They did not know which of the 3 held the women currently, including Margaret Coyle. They did not know what Wade's response would be to finding the box gone. They did not know how much time they had before he sent someone looking for it and looking for Nora. He'll send someone, Hank said from the doorway. He had been listening. When he realizes the box is missing, he's careful. He counts things. How long? Nora asked. Days, maybe less. He came in and sat at the table. There's a man he uses for this kind of work. Name of Rel. Hank paused in a particular way, the way people paused when something was complicated. He's not like the others Wade uses. He doesn't enjoy it, but he does it. You know him? Rose said. I know of him. His mother, another pause. It doesn't matter. He's competent and he follows orders and Wade trusts him. Where does he operate from? Wherever Wade points him. Hank looked at the box. We should assume we have 2 days, maybe 3. That means we need to know which property before we move. Dex, Nora said quietly. Both of them looked at her. Dex would know, she said. He keeps the books. He knows where the money goes. She was not looking at either of them, looking at the table at her hands. He's not a bad man. I need you to understand that. Wade got to him when he was young and angry and feeling like the world had overlooked him, and Wade gave him a way to matter. That's how it works, isn't it? She looked at Hank. That's what Wade does. He finds the place where a person feels small, and he fills it. Hank did not answer, but Rose saw something shift in his face, the recognition of a person who has been described accurately. I could talk to him, Nora said. If I could see him alone without Wade around. Wade won't let that happen, Hank said. He'll know you're gone by now. He'll be watching Dex. Then what do we do? The 3 of them sat with the question. Outside, a wind came up from the south, running through the dry grass with a sound like water. The day continued to warm. The note arrived late afternoon. Rose was in the side room reading when she heard the horse, a single horse walking slowly. No urgency. She went to the window. Hank was already in the yard, standing with his thumbs in his belt, facing the rider. The rider was a young man, younger than she'd expected, mid-20s at most, lean, sitting a black horse with a kind of careful posture that spoke of attention to how he appeared rather than comfort. He wore no particular uniform of villainy, just ranch clothes, a flat-brimmed hat, a gun worn low the way men wore guns when they wanted you to notice it. He did not dismount. He sat and looked at Hank. Hank looked back at him. After a moment, the young man pulled something from his coat, a folded piece of paper, and dropped it in the dirt between them. He looked at Hank one more second, then turned his horse and walked it back down the track. He had not said a word. Hank waited until he was out of sight, then stepped forward and picked up the paper. Rose watched from the window as he read it. She watched his expression unchanged, controlled, and then watched him fold the paper and put it in his coat pocket and stand looking at the horizon for a long moment. She went out to the porch. "Was that Rel?" she said. "Yes." "What did the note say?" He took it out and held it toward her. She read it. "The man you call your brother will not see Saturday morning. If the man I know as a former lawman does not come to the church, and the church on the Clearwater Road alone by Friday at dusk, I am not my employer. But I do my employer's work." Rose read it twice. She handed it back. "He came alone," she said. "Not with men. He dropped the note and left." "Yes, that's not what you do if you're delivering a threat meant to be enforced immediately. That's what you do if you're giving someone time to think." Hank looked at her. "Yes. There's something not right about his position," Rose said. "The way you described him, the hesitation. He's Wade's man." "I know, but is he only Wade's man?" She thought about what Hank had started to say earlier, his mother. What happened to his mother? A long pause. Hank sat down on the porch step. He looked tired for the first time since she'd arrived. Not physically tired, but the deeper kind, the kind that came from having carried the same weight in the same direction for too long. "She was on a list," he said quietly. "Not this list, an earlier one, from a long time ago, before Rel was old enough to know what it meant." He stopped. "She died 3 years ago, in a place Wade had kept her. Rel was 18 when he found out. He went to work for Wade 6 months after that." Rose stared at him. "He went to work for the man who killed his mother, yes." Hank looked at his hands. "I've thought about that a lot. Why a man would do that. The only answer I keep arriving at is that it's a way of staying close to the wound, of not having to feel the thing you feel about the wound by covering it up with something that looks like power over it." He paused. Or maybe he needed to find proof first, something solid, before he did anything else. The late afternoon sun came in low and orange across the yard, making everything look briefly falsely warm. "He's going to help us," Rose said. It was not a question. "I don't know that," Hank said. "I think you do," she said. "Or you'd have already started talking about going to that church alone." He looked at her. She looked back. "I'm going to the church," he said. "That part is certain." "I know," she said. "But you think Rella's going to be on your side when you get there." Another long pause. Below in the valley, a hawk was making slow circles above the dry grass. "I think there's a chance," he said. "A man who goes to work for someone who destroyed his family, he's either Wade's forever or he's waiting for the right moment." He looked at the note in his hand. He came alone. He dropped a note and left. He didn't bring men to take us right now when he had the advantage. He folded the note. "Those are things a man does when he's not sure anymore which side he's on." "You could be wrong," Rose said. "Yes," he said. "I could be wrong." The evening was the quiet kind that settled over the Montana hills, like something deliberate, not peaceful exactly, but still the way things went still before a change in weather. Nora had gone to bed early. The day had worn on her. Rose could see the pregnancy in how she moved now, in the way she favored one side and how her hand kept drifting to her midsection. Rose and Hank sat on the porch in the cooling air. She had brought the Dickens out of habit, but she wasn't reading it. She had it in her lap, and she was looking at the first stars coming out over the eastern hills and thinking. The fire inside the house had burned low enough that its light no longer reached the porch, and they sat in the gathering dark, two shapes at the edge of the lamplight, spilling from the window, separated by 2 feet of air that felt in some moments like more, and in other moments like considerably less. "Do you ever regret coming west?" Hank said. It was the most personal thing he had asked her in 6 days. She considered it seriously. "I came west because I thought there was a school," she said. "I was recruited, that's the right word for it, recruited with a letter and a contract and assurances in Columbus by a man I thought was a land agent. He was very professional, very convincing." She paused. "I was 42 years old with 14 years of teaching behind me and no particular future in Ohio, and someone was offering me something that looked like adventure and purpose in a new chapter. I suppose I wanted to be the kind of woman who could do that." "You are that kind of woman," Hank said. "I got tied up in a grass field and left to die," Rose said. "And cut your own way free," he said, "and made it to something solid." He looked at the stars. "That's the definition." Rose turned this over in her mind. There was something in the plainness of how he said it, not trying to comfort her, not performing something, just stating what he saw that felt more sustaining than comfort would have. She thought about all the years she had spent in Ohio in boarding houses and shared rooms teaching children who grew up and moved away and sometimes sent letters and mostly didn't, spending her evenings with borrowed books and her Sundays walking the same familiar streets. She had thought for a long time that this was what her life was, that it was enough. She had decided firmly that it was enough because the alternative, the wanting of something larger, something less bounded, was too uncomfortable to live with. And then the letter had come, printed on good paper with a territorial seal that had looked genuine and turned out not to be. And she had wanted it to be real with a ferocity she had not let herself feel in years. And that wanting had overridden every careful instinct she'd developed in 42 years of reading people carefully. I wasn't cautious enough, she said. You were trusting, Hank said. That's not the same thing. In this country, in any country, trusting is not the same as being naive, he said. Naive means you don't have information. Trusting means you extend good faith toward people who present themselves as trustworthy. That's what civilization requires. That's the thing that holds it together. He paused. The fault is with the people who abuse it, not with the people who extend it. Rose looked at him. He was looking at the stars, not at her. That's a remarkably generous way to think, she said, for a man who spent 11 years in the Marshal Service. Something moved in his face. Maybe that's why I was effective, he said. I kept believing people were worth the effort of being dealt with honestly, even the ones who weren't. He paused. Mostly. Mostly, she said. One exception, he said. One very specific exception in 1874. Rose was quiet. The fire inside the house settled with a soft sound, sending a brief orange glow through the window. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. Why Montana of all the places you could have gone? He thought about this for a moment. My sister lived here, he said. Before she died, she homesteaded in this valley, she and her husband. He died before I came back. She lasted another 2 years on her own before the consumption took her. He paused. She left me the land. I came out to settle the estate, and I just stayed. He looked at the dark hills. I don't know entirely why. There was something about a place where someone you loved had managed to build something real. It felt like the right kind of place to try to figure out how to be honest again. And have you, Rose said, figured it out? A long pause, longer than the others. I think it's an ongoing project, he said. I think the moment you believe you figured it out is probably the moment you start sliding backward. He looked at her then. Like any skill, you stop practicing and you lose it. It's exactly like teaching, Rose said. You can never coast. Every student is a new problem. Every year the same lesson has to be found fresh. She paused. I've taught the American Revolution to 14-year-olds 11 times. It's different every time, because they're different every time. What makes it different? What they bring to it, what they need to understand, the questions they ask. She turned the Dickens over in her lap. One year I had a boy who asked me very seriously whether the colonists were right. Not whether they won, whether they were right. He was 12. He was the youngest of 6 children, and his father was a hard man, and he wanted to know if a person had the right to leave something they'd been born into and try to make something different. What did you tell him? I told him that history rarely answers the question of rightness, but that it consistently demonstrates that people who act from conscience, even imperfectly, tend to leave something better behind than people who act from convenience. She paused. He thought about it for a week. Then he came back and said, Miss Calloway, my father isn't a British king. And I said no, but the principle applies at all scales. And he looked at me for a long time, and then he said, I think I'm going to go west someday. And I told him that if he did, he should write to me. Did he? Yes, she said, 2 years ago, from Wyoming. He's a farrier. She smiled. He said the horses don't argue about history. Hank laughed. An actual sound bereaved surprise by itself, but real. Rose had not heard him laugh before. It was a good sound, slightly rough, the laugh of someone who didn't do it often enough, and so hadn't worn it smooth. She found she wanted to hear it again, which was an entirely unexpected feeling to have on a porch in Montana in the dark, with the weight of everything that was coming tomorrow pressing down. Do you still believe a man can find redemption after losing everything? Hank said. He said it quietly with the careful quality of someone asking a question they actually want the answer to, rather than one they're using as a kind of performance. Rose thought about it honestly. I think redemption is the wrong word, she said. It implies a return to something, a going back to. I don't think you can go back. The thing you did or didn't do is done. It's in the record. She paused. But I think people can become something they weren't. I've watched it happen in classrooms. A child who learns to read at 8 years old is not undoing the years they spent not knowing. They're becoming someone who knows going forward. She paused. That seems right to me. That seems like enough. The stars had come all the way in now, the full, dense Montana sky, more stars than a person raised in Ohio could quite account for. Do you still believe it, he said, after 2 weeks of what you've been through? Yes, she said, without hesitation. Because I'm here, and I'm figuring out what to do next. And that's the whole of it, isn't it? Hank looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said, I suppose it is. The ranch was quieter after Dex went in. Rose sat on the porch step and turned her face to the sun, which had come up properly, now warming the valley in the slow, patient way of September mornings, the light coming in at an angle and making every dry stalk of grass and every weathered fence post look temporarily gold. She had been in Montana for less than a month. It felt longer. It felt in some ways like the period of her life she had been waiting to arrive at without knowing she was waiting. She thought about Ohio, about Columbus with its solid brick buildings and its familiar streets, and the school where she had spent 14 years. She thought about the faces of students she'd had 50, perhaps 60 children over the years, each of them a small project in patience and precision, each of them someone she would not forget, even when she forgot the specifics. She thought about the boarding house room she'd lived in for 9 years, which was clean and acceptable and had good light in the morning. She had thought that room was home. She had told herself it was firmly and consistently the way you told yourself things when the alternative was too large to look at directly. She picked up the copy of Bleak House that she'd brought out with her. She'd finished it twice now, once when she was recovering from the fever, and once more slowly in the evenings. She opened it to the inscription page. For Henry, who will understand Jarndyce better than he thinks. She ran her finger over the writing. A sister's handwriting. Someone who knew him when he was young and believed in what he could become. She closed it and held it in her lap and looked at the valley. The sound of the hammering began Hank working on something at the north fence line. It was a steady, unhurried sound. It had a rhythm to it. She had noticed over the past week that everything Hank did had a rhythm work speech, the way he moved through a room. It was the rhythm of a person who had learned to do things carefully because carelessness had cost him, and who had kept that lesson so long, it was now simply the way he was. She thought about Margaret Coyle, who had sat on the floor of a root cellar for 3 months and had told Rose in the first hour after Rose had found her that she still wanted to teach. That she had thought about the school, the real school, the one she'd come for, the one that had turned out not to exist, and she had spent those 3 months building it in her head, planning lessons, imagining her students. I figured I might as well do something useful with the time, she had said. Rose had thought, this is a person I want to know for a long time. She stood up. She went inside and found the paper she'd been using to draft the letter to Marshall Creed, and she added at the bottom, already written, already sent. But in her mind, she added it now, which was what mattered, a line about Alice Rell, about a woman whose name should be in the record. She put the pen down. She went to the north fence. Friday came in slow and overcast, the sky the color of old pewter, the mountains to the west hidden behind a low ceiling of cloud. Rose stood in the yard in the early morning and looked at the weather and thought, good. A cloudy sky meant a dark ride. A dark ride meant cover. Hank saddled the gray horse for her before noon and didn't say much about it. He showed her the cinch and where it tended to loosen on the left side, and he showed her the creek crossing at the base of the valley and told her to cross it at the wide place, not the narrow, because the narrow had a bad bottom. He was precise about practical things. She was precise back. She showed him what she'd figured out from the papers, the Harrow property's location relative to the creek, the fact that the letters mentioned a well and an old root cellar, the detail about a fence line that ran east to west and would be visible from the ridge. He listened the way he always listened, completely without interruption, filing everything. If the property is occupied, she said, I won't approach directly. I'll watch from the ridge and I'll wait. How long? As long as it takes, she looked at him. I have patience. It's professionally developed. He came as close to a full smile as she had seen him come. They rode out together at midday, Hank south toward the Clearwater Road, Rose east toward the ridge that overlooked the creek drainage. At the fork in the track where their ways diverged, Hank pulled his horse up and looked at her. Miss Calloway, he said. Rose, she said. She had told him this twice. He kept doing it. Rose, he said, and then nothing else for a moment. The clouds moved over them, the light shifting in gray. I know, she said. She wasn't entirely sure what she was responding to, but the answer felt right. He turned his horse and rode south. She turned hers and rode east. She did not watch him go. She had learned that watching people ride away created a specific kind of fear she couldn't afford right now. She rode east. The church on the Clearwater Road had not been a church for 20 years. Hank had known it in its operational days, had passed it once a decade ago on a marshal's business that had taken him through this county. It had been a plain building then unpainted, with a small cemetery beside it that was already full and mostly untended. Now it was a ruin. The steeple had collapsed inward. The windows were gone, the frames bare against the gray sky. The door hung at an angle from one hinge. He arrived 30 minutes before dusk and circled the building from a distance before approaching, reading the ground the way he'd spent 11 years learning to read ground. Fresh tracks, 2 horses both tied behind the building. Not more than an hour ago. He dismounted and tied his own horse to the fence rail away from the others. He checked his gun. He walked toward the open door. Hank Mercer, said a voice from the shadows inside. Come on in. He went in. Hank looked at the ruined church and thought about choices. Not in the abstract, he had done enough abstract thinking in 6 years alone in the valley to last a lifetime. He thought about specific choices, the ones with weights attached, the ones that had shaped everything that had come after them. He thought about 1874, which he had thought about every day for 8 years, in the particular way you thought about things that could not be changed, not with self-flagellation, not anymore, but with the steady, careful attention of a man who wanted to be sure he understood what had happened so that he might understand what happened next. Wade had been his friend for 12 years before Billings. They had ridden together out of necessity, first 2 young marshals assigned to the same jurisdiction, and then out of something that became genuine, the way proximity and shared hardship made things genuine. He had known Wade's flaws. He had seen the edge of something harder and colder underneath the charm, the capability, the loyalty that had seemed in those years absolute. He had seen it and had named it in his mind as the kind of edge that a hard life put on a good man, because it was more comfortable to think that than to follow where the evidence pointed. That was the thing he could not forgive himself for in the end. Not the money. The money had sat on his desk for 3 days before he had sent it back anonymously, unable to keep it and unable to report it, which was its own kind of moral failure. But the years before that, when he'd had all the information he needed and had made a choice about what to do with it, and the choice he'd made was to keep the friendship and look away from what the friendship was covering. He thought about this as he stood in the church looking at the man he'd ridden with for 12 years and looking through him at the 8 years of harm those 12 years of friendship had ultimately made possible. I'm not angry at you, he said. He said it because it was true and because Wade needed to hear a true thing. Wade looked at him. No, I was for a long time, but anger it's a way of making the other person responsible for what you carry. He paused. You made your choices. I made mine. The harm that came from both of them is real and it doesn't go away. But the anger doesn't help it go away. He looked at Wade steadily. What helps it go away is doing what I should have done in 1874, which is making sure someone answers for it in a way that means something. The interior of the church was what interiors became when weather and time had worked on them. The pews rotted to splinters, the floor warped, and in places collapsed entirely into the darkness beneath the walls, stripped of any decoration. Light came in gray and flat through the empty windows. The smell was old wood and damp, and something else, the smell of a place where things had ended. Wade Colton stood at the far end of what had been the nave in the space where the altar might have been. He was older than Hank had last seen him, nearly 60 now, a broad man running to heaviness with a face that had been handsome once and was now something else, the features roughened and sharpened by years of being who he was. His hair had gone white at the temples. He wore a good coat, the kind that spoke of money spent carefully. He looked at Hank the way a man looked at something he'd been waiting for. Rel stood off to the left near a collapsed pew. His gun was holstered. His hands were at his sides. His face was the face of a man who had made a decision he was not entirely sure about and was committed to it now regardless. I was starting to think you'd send someone else, Wade said. Or not come at all. You have my brother, Hank said. I have your brother's cooperation, Wade said. There's a difference. He tilted his head slightly. He came to me years ago, young and angry, and feeling like the family name had been emptied out by you leaving. You know this. I know. He made his choices. I gave him a structure to put them in. Wade spread his hands, a gesture of reasonableness, of practiced motion. You're angry at me. You've been angry at me for 8 years. But you and I both know that what happened in Billings in 1874 had more than one party to it. Yes, Hank said, it did. Wade looked at him, studied him. The quality of his gaze was the thing Hank remembered most from their youth. The sense of being Wade assessed the slightly uncomfortable feeling of being known better than you'd intended. You found the box, Wade said, or someone brought it to you. He paused. Nora Vance. She's a brave woman. She is. Brave and foolish. The same way the school teacher from Ohio is brave and foolish? Wade tilted his head again. Yes, I know about her. I've always known she was with you. I chose her specifically, Hank, the woman I knew would bring you in. Hank went very still. She's connected to the Coil girl, Wade said. Who is connected to the list? Which is connected to you through the receipt that I made sure was in that box. He paused. You didn't think Nora found that box by accident. I put it where I knew she'd find it eventually. I've been steering this toward this moment for 6 months. The silence in the broken church had a specific quality now, the silence of things becoming clear. Why, Hank said. Because I want it to be over, Wade said. Not the way you think. Not you killing me, not the law coming in from Billings. I want us to end it the way we should have ended it in 1874. The two of us making a decision about what comes next. He looked at Hank steadily. I'm done. I have been for 2 years. I have money. I have land. I have a way to disappear. What I need is for the man who has the most reason to come after me to decide not to. You want me to let you walk, Hank said. I want you to let me leave, Wade said, with the understanding that the women, all of them, including the Coil girl, are released to wherever they choose to run. The properties are abandoned. The men are dispersed. He paused. Dex's cooperation ends. He's released from the arrangement. Hank looked at him for a long time. You do that, he said. Release them, all of them. I'll do what I said, Wade replied, but only if you let me walk away from here. He stopped. Rel will make sure it's done. He knows where they are. He knows the arrangements. He glanced at Rel. Don't you? Rel said nothing. He was looking at the floor. And what stops you from starting again somewhere else? Hank said. Age, Wade said simply. I'm 58 years old and I'm tired and I've done things I can't take back and I know it. I'm not looking for absolution. I'm looking for an exit. He held Hank's gaze. The same as you were 6 years ago when you came out here and disappeared into this valley. The word landed. It was true. It was, too true, the kind of truth that made you want to look away. The difference, Hank said, is that when I walked away from what I'd done, nobody else paid for it. You walking away right now means those women get to piece their lives back together alone. It means Dex carries everything without having to face any of it. It means everyone gets to move forward, Wade said, which is what I'm offering. It's not enough, Hank said. Wade's expression shifted, just slightly, a calculation running behind his eyes. Then what would be enough, he said. The Coil girl, Hank said. Where is she? Rel, Wade said. Rel looked up from the floor. He looked at Wade. He looked at Hank. Harrow property, he said. His voice was level. East of Cutter's Creek. I know, Hank said. He was watching Wade. Someone is already moving toward that property. Wade's eyes narrowed. The school teacher, Hank said. She worked it out from the papers. She left at midday. Something moved in Wade's face, the first crack in the reasonableness, the first glimpse of the thing that ran underneath all of it. Not rage exactly, something colder. She'll get there, Hank said. And she'll find what's there, and she'll document it, and she'll take it to Billings. And it won't matter whether I let you walk or not. He paused. So what I want from you, Wade, is not an exit. What I want is for you to stand in a room with a U.S. Marshal, which I am no longer, but I know where one is, and tell him everything. All of it. Every property, every name, every man on your payroll, and where Dex Vance fits in. He stopped. In exchange for that, I'll tell the Marshal that you cooperated, which is worth something, which is the most I can do. Wade looked at him for a very long time. The broken windows let in gray light. The floor creaked somewhere beneath them. Somewhere outside, the wind picked up and ran through the dead grass with that sound, the sound of water that had gone somewhere else. You were always honest, Wade said quietly, even when you were doing the wrong thing. That's the thing about you, I could never quite. He stopped. All right. He said it simply. as if it had been the next word in a sentence he'd been writing for a long time. "All right," he said again, "but I want it known that I cooperated. I want that clear." "I'll make it clear," Hank said. Wade nodded. He looked at Rel. "Go," he said. "Harrow property first. Whatever the woman from Ohio needs, give it to her." Rel moved without hesitation. He crossed the floor of the old church and went through the door and was gone, and the sound of his horse departing faded into the gray afternoon. Hank and Wade stood in the ruined church in the gathering dark, and for a moment they were both 25 years old. Two young men who believed that being good at hard things was the same as being good. "I'm sorry about your sister," Wade said. He had known her a long time ago. "I know," Hank said. "She was better than both of us." "Yes," Hank said, "she was." They walked out together into the last of the daylight. The Harrow property sat low in a fold of the land between two ridges, sheltered from the wind, but also from visibility. You couldn't see it until you were almost on top of it, which was probably why it had been chosen. Rose found the ridge just before dusk. She lay flat on it in the dry grass and looked down at the property for 15 minutes before she moved. She counted one building, the original homestead, one room, chinked logs, a small window on the south wall. A second smaller building that might have been a root cellar or a smokehouse. A well to the east. One horse in a small pen. One man. He sat on a crate outside the main building's door, tilted back against the wall, a rifle across his knees. One man was manageable. She thought about how to manage him. She was 42 years old and she had never done anything like this. She had been a teacher for 14 years. She had graded papers and settled arguments between 9-year-olds and sat through 4 school board meetings every year and organized book sales, and once memorably talked down a very angry parent who had come to her classroom with the clear intention of violence. She had done it by being calm and specific and refusing to be afraid of him. She could do that again. She moved down the ridge slowly, keeping to the grass using the failing light. She came around to the west side of the building, away from the guard who was watching the road to the south. She reached the wall and pressed herself against the logs. The window was on the south wall around the corner from her arm. She couldn't see through it, but she could hear through the gaps in the chinking. Voices, more than one, women's voices. She closed her eyes for a moment. Then she went around the corner. The guard saw her before she was halfway to the door. He came off the crate fast, the rifle coming up, his mouth opening to shout. "My name is Rose Calloway," she said clearly. "I was taken by Wade Colton's men 2 weeks ago and escaped. I'm alone. I'm not armed, and I need you to listen to me for exactly 1 minute." The rifle stayed up. The man stared at her. He was young, mid-20s, rough-faced, the look of someone who had come into this work through necessity rather than inclination. "1 minute," Rose said. "After that, you can do whatever you decide to do. But 1 minute." She met his eyes. She had learned teaching children that the moment of actual contact, the moment when a person felt genuinely seen, was the moment that changed things. "Wade Colton is at the church on the Clearwater Road right now, making an arrangement with a former U.S. Marshal. By tomorrow morning, this operation is finished. Every man associated with it will be known by name." She paused. "You can be part of what ends today, or you can be on a list that gets read to a judge in Billings." She kept her voice level. "That's the choice. That's the whole choice." The rifle lowered, not all the way, but down from her face to her chest, which was something. "I don't know you," he said. "No," she said. "But you know the name Rose Calloway from the list in the box, which went missing from Dex Vance's barn 3 weeks ago." She watched his face. "And now you know I'm not where I was supposed to be, which means something happened. Which means what I'm telling you might be true." He stared at her. She waited. She had learned that too, that the right moment to press was never immediately after you'd made your argument. You let it land. You let it settle. The rifle came down the rest of the way. "There's 4 of them in there," he said. His voice was low. "The Coyle girl and 3 others." "I know," Rose said. "I'm going to take them out of here. You can come with us, or you can ride north, and I'll tell whoever asks that you helped." She paused. "But I need to go in now." He stepped aside. She went in. There were 4 women in the room. Not chained, the door had been enough, sitting in the thin light from the south window in various states of exhaustion and waiting. They looked up when Rose came in, and the look on their faces was the look she had seen in her classroom, on the faces of children who had been waiting so long they had stopped expecting anything to arrive. The red hair was the first thing she saw. "Margaret," Rose said. The young woman, she was 23 now, or thereabouts, older in the eyes than in the face, stared at her. "Miss Calloway," she whispered, as if the name might break if she said it too loud. Yes, Rose said. She crossed the room in 4 steps and crouched down in front of her, and Margaret Coyle reached out and grabbed her hands and held on, and Rose held on back, and neither of them said anything for a long moment. How did you find us? Margaret said finally. Papers, Rose said, and maps, and a man who used to know where things were. She looked at the other 3 women. Are any of you hurt? Can you all ride? They could. They were hungry and frightened and had been in this room for varying amounts of time, but they were alive and their minds were their own and they could ride. Rose organized them the way she organized a classroom. Clearly, specifically, no wasted motion. She gave each of them a task. She explained where they were going and how they would get there. She told them about Nora, who would have food and water and a fire. She told them they were going north. She did not tell them about the receipt in her pocket. That was Hank's to tell or not to tell. It was not hers. Outside, Rel arrived. He pulled his horse up when he saw the guard standing with his rifle lowered and Rose coming out the door with 4 women behind her. He looked at all of this for a moment, then he swung down off his horse. Wade sent me, he said. I know, Rose said. She looked at him carefully. He was younger than she'd expected. Younger even than the guard, perhaps 22 or 3, with a face that had been shaped by something heavy sitting on it for a long time. Are there other properties, other women? 2 more properties, he said. I know where. And the women there, safe enough for now? Not for long. He looked at the 4 women behind Rose. He looked at the ground. There's a marshal in Billings named Creed. He's one of the clean ones. If someone contacted him, I'll write to him tonight, Rose said. I need the addresses of the other properties. He gave them to her. He recited them from memory precisely with landmarks and distances, the way a person recited things they had rehearsed. You've been waiting for this, she said. He looked at her. His jaw tightened. I've been waiting for someone who could make it a stick, he said. Information without a receiver is just words. He stopped. My mother's name was Alice Rell. If there's a record made, I'd like her name in it, for what it's worth. Rose looked at him for a long moment. I'll make sure of it, she said. He nodded. He looked at the guard. Something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or something more complicated. Then Rell mounted his horse. Tell Mercer I'll be in Billings by Monday, he said. I'll talk to Creed directly. He paused. Tell him I said he'll know what this means, that I'm done letting the thing I hate most be the thing I serve. He turned his horse north and rode. Hank rode back to the ranch in the dark, with Wade Colton upborne beside him. It was a strange ride, not hostile, not exactly comfortable the way being near someone you had a long and complicated history with was never quite either. They did not speak much. The clouds had thickened and there were no stars. The darkness was dense, and the horses picked their way by instinct. At the junction where the Clearwater Road met the valley track, Wade pulled his horse up. I'll wait in Billings, he said, at the Drover's Hotel. Give me a week before you bring Creed. I need to, he stopped. I have things to put in order. 3 days, Hank said. A pause. 4. 3, Hank said. After that, I'll assume you're not there and I'll tell Creed what I know regardless. Wade looked at him. You would do that, he said, even though it implicates you. Yes, Hank said. Wade looked at him a moment longer. Then he said, the thing I never understood about you is how you managed to be both the most honest and the most dishonest man I've ever known, both at the same time. I'm working on the ratio, Hank said. Something moved in Wade's face. It might have been a smile. It was the last time Hank would ever see it. 3 days, Wade said, and turned his horse toward Billings. The ranch was lit when Hank came into the valley. Not just the lantern in the window. There were lights in both the main house and the barn. And as he rode in, he could hear voices more than one, and then he saw the horses in the corral and counted them. Nor's the gray 3 others. He came into the yard and Rose stepped out the front door onto the porch. She looked at him the way a person looked when they'd been holding their breath for several hours and had decided by now to stop. He saw her take him in upright hole alone. Dex, she said. He wasn't there, Hank said. Wade says he'll come in on his own. I believe him or I don't, time will tell. He swung down off his horse. The church. Empty except for Wade, she said. He let it happen. Yes. He looked at the horses in the corral. Who's here? Margaret Coyle and 3 other women from the Harrow property, and Rell. She came down the porch steps. He's inside. He wants to talk to you. Hank stopped. Rell is here. He brought blankets and provisions from somewhere. He knows where the other two properties are. He's going to talk to the marshal in Billings directly. She looked at him steadily. You were right about him. That doesn't happen as often as I'd like, Hank said. No, she said. It doesn't. And for the first time in a long week, she smiled at him. Not the reluctant half smile of careful people, but a real one, brief and warm and entirely her own. Come inside, there's food. The inside of the ranch house that night was something Hank would not have predicted a week ago. The four women from the Harrow property were at the table and on the floor near the stove eating and talking in low voices, the talk of people who had been kept in silence and were cautiously rediscovering the sound of their own words. Nora had made stew from what she could find in the larder. She moved between them with a practicality and a warmth that Hank recognized as something Dex had never deserved and had had anyway. Rel sat in the corner. He was a young man and he was clearly exhausted, and he sat with the particular stillness of someone who had done a hard thing and was not yet sure whether it had landed. Hank sat across from him. My employer talked to you, Rel said. Former employer, Hank said. Rel looked at him. Is that right? He gave it up, Hank said. He'll talk to Creed and Billings in 3 days. He paused. You can corroborate. I plan to, Rel said. He looked at his hands, rough hands, a young man's hands that had done things they weren't supposed to do. I know what you're wondering. Tell me, whether I knew when I started working for Wade what he had done to my mother. Rel looked up. His eyes were clear, the clarity of someone who had made peace with something painful rather than buried it. I knew. I always knew. I went in because I needed proof. Something that would stand in a courtroom, not just things I could say. He paused. It took longer than I thought it would. And by the time I had it, I'd done things. He stopped. I'd done things. I own them. I'm not making a case that I'm innocent. I'm not asking you to, Hank said. But I have the proof. I have it all. Ledgers, letters, dates, properties, names. He reached into his coat and produced a smaller box, much smaller than the one Nora had brought, a tin box battered and sealed with a leather strap. He set it on the floor between them. This is my mother's life and how it ended and who ended it. And it's everything else Wade built on top of that. He looked at the box. I'm giving it to you because you're the person who can do something with it, and because she would have wanted someone to do something with it. Hank looked at the tin box for a long moment. Alice Rel, he said. The young man looked up. Something moved in his face, surprise, then something that wasn't quite relief, but was in the same neighborhood. Rose told me, Hank said. Her name goes in the record, I'll make sure. Rel nodded once sharp. He pressed his lips together. He looked at the wall. Hank picked up the tin box and held it, feeling the weight of it the same way he'd felt the weight of Wade's decision in the church, the weight of things that had been waiting a long time to be set down. Dex came the next morning. He rode in just after dawn, alone from the south. He looked worse than Hank had seen him in years, hollowed out, uncertain, the anger that had defined him for so long, apparently having left him somewhere along the road. He sat on his horse in the yard and looked at the ranch house and didn't get down. Hank came out. They looked at each other across the yard for a long moment. Nora's inside, Hank said. She's fine. Dex's shoulders dropped fractionally. The baby, she's fine, Hank said again. Both of them. Dex pressed his lips together and looked somewhere past Hank's shoulder. Wade's gone, he said. Told me last night it was over. Just like that. 20 years of, and he just says it's over. He stopped. Is it? Yes, Hank said, if you make it so. I'll need to talk to a marshal. Not a question. A statement, the acknowledgement of someone who has arrived at the logical end of something. Marshal Creed and Billings. He's clean. Rel is talking to him Monday. Hank paused. Tell him what you told Nora. Tell him what Wade told you. Tell him all of it, including your part. He looked at his brother, at a man who was 50 years old and looked at and had built half a life on sand. It won't be nothing. There'll be consequences, but there'll also be the other side of it. Dex looked at him. You could have come back, he said. When you left after 74, you could have come back. I know, Hank said. You just disappeared. I know. I thought you were ashamed of me. Hank looked at him. No, he said. I was ashamed of myself. There's a difference, and I should have made it clear, and I didn't, and I'm sorry for that. Dex stared at him. Then he looked at his hands on the reins. I don't know how to be different from what I am, he said. Nobody does, Hank said. You start with what's in front of you, and you choose the smaller thing that's better. Then the next thing. That's how it goes. A long silence. The morning light was strengthening the clouds from the day before, having blown east, leaving a clear, pale sky. The horses in the corral moved. The grass was still just briefly. I should go in, Dex said. See Nora. Yes, Hank said, you should. Dex swung down off his horse. He walked toward the house, and when he passed Hank, he stopped for a moment without turning around. You know what the worst thing is, he said. The worst thing is you were right about him all along. From the beginning, I just didn't want to see it. I wasn't right about much, Hank said, but maybe that one. Dex went inside. The ranch was quieter after Dex went in. Rose sat on the porch step and turned her face to the sun, which had come up properly, now warming the valley in the slow, patient way of September mornings, the light coming in at an angle and making every dry stalk of grass and every weathered fence post look temporarily gold. She had been in Montana for less than a month. It felt longer. It felt in some ways like the period of her life she had been waiting to arrive at without knowing she was waiting. She thought about Ohio, about Columbus with its solid brick buildings and its familiar streets, and the school where she had spent 14 years. She thought about the faces of students she'd had 50, perhaps 60 children over the years, each of them a small project in patience and precision, each of them someone she would not forget even when she forgot the specifics. She thought about the boarding house room she'd lived in for 9 years, which was clean and acceptable and had good light in the morning. She had thought that room was home. She had told herself it was firmly and consistently the way you told yourself things when the alternative was too large to look at directly. She picked up the copy of Bleak House that she'd brought out with her. She'd finished it twice now, once when she was recovering from the fever, and once more slowly in the evenings. She opened it to the inscription page. For Henry, who will understand Jarndyce better than he thinks. She ran her finger over the writing. A sister's handwriting. Someone who knew him when he was young and believed in what he could become. She closed it and held it in her lap and looked at the valley. The sound of the hammering began Hank working on something at the north fence line. It was a steady, unhurried sound. It had a rhythm to it. She had noticed over the past week that everything Hank did had a rhythm work speech, the way he moved through a room. It was the rhythm of a person who had learned to do things carefully because carelessness had cost him, and who had kept that lesson so long. It was now simply the way he was. She thought about Margaret Coyle, who had sat on the floor of a root cellar for 3 months and had told Rose in the first hour after Rose had found her that she still wanted to teach. That she had thought about the school, the real school, the one she'd come for, the one that had turned out not to exist, and she had spent those 3 months building it in her head, planning lessons, imagining her students. I figured I might as well do something useful with the time, she had said. Rose had thought, this is a person I want to know for a long time. She stood up. She went inside and found the paper she'd been using to draft the letter to Marshall Creed, and she added at the bottom, already written, already sent, but in her mind she added it now, which was what mattered, a line about Alice Rell, about a woman whose name should be in the record. She put the pen down. She went to the north fence. By noon, the ranch was quieter. The 4 women from the Harrow property were in the barn, not because it was confining, but because it was private, and they were doing the careful work of talking to each other about what came next and where they wanted to go. Nora was with Dex, the door of the side room closed. Rell had ridden out at first light toward Billings. Rose found Hank at the fence line on the north edge of the property, mending a gap that had been there since she arrived. He was working steadily, not urgently, with the unhurried competence of someone performing a task they had been putting off. She stood at the fence and watched him work. I wrote to Marshall Creed this morning, she said. Rell gave me the details for the other 2 properties. I put the addresses in the letter with the tin box's contents cataloged. She paused. It should be enough. It's more than enough, Hank said. He drove a nail. Between the box and Rell and Wade cooperating, Creed will have everything he needs. And the receipt, Rose said. He stopped. He looked at her. She reached into her pocket and held out the paper, the one with his name on it, the 1874 receipt. I didn't put it in the letter, she said. I didn't give it to Rell. It's been in my pocket since the morning I found it. She held it out. What you do with it is your decision. He looked at the paper in her hand for a long moment. He did not take it. Creed should know, he said. Maybe, Rose said, or maybe what Creed needs to know is what you're willing to do now. The letter explains you were a former marshal. It vouches for the integrity of the evidence. It does what needs to be done. She kept holding the paper out. But this one, this is yours. He took it. He looked at it for a moment. Then he folded it and put it in his pocket, and he went back to mending the fence. Rose leaned on the rail. Margaret wants to stay in Montana, she said. Hmm. She says she came out here for a reason, even if the reason turned out to be a lie. The West is what she wanted. She wants her to find a real school. Apparently there's a town 3 counties over that's been trying to establish one for 2 years. Hank drove another nail. That right. The other 3 women are going back east. I'm going to help them get to Billings and see them to the rail. She paused. After that, she stopped. He stopped too. He looked at her. After that, she said, I was going to see if Margaret needs a second teacher. Something settled on his face, not the almost smile, not the careful neutrality, but something more honest than either. 3 counties over, he said. Approximately. She looked at the mountains. I don't know this country yet. I'm still learning the roads. I know the roads, he said. Yes, she said, you do? He set down the hammer. He turned toward her fully, and she turned toward him, and they stood on either side of the fence in the noonlight, the converted valley grass golden around them, the mountains sharp and clear to the west, the distance between them exactly 1 fence rail's width. Rose Calloway, he said. Hank Mercer, she said back. I was a man who did a wrong thing and then hid from it for 8 years, he said. I want to be clear about that. I know, she said. I've known it for a week. And you're still standing at my fence. It's a good fence, she said. You mend it carefully. He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he reached out and unlatched the gate in the fence rail and swung it open. She walked through. Push on. The ride to Billings took 2 days. Hank rode with them, with Rose, with Margaret Coyle, with the 3 women going home. He knew the roads, as he had said, and he knew which creek crossings had bad bottoms, and which towns had clean water, and which stretches of trail were best covered in the early morning before the heat came down. He rode ahead when there was something to check, and behind when it made more sense to bring up the rear, and he did not make a thing of either. In the evenings, camped by whatever water he'd found, Rose watched him with the women, not performing protection, not standing guard with theatrical vigilance, but simply present, answering questions when asked, offering what he knew when it was useful. He talked to Margaret the longest. She had questions about the territory, about the towns, about what a school in a frontier county actually required, and he answered them with the same precision he brought to everything. On the second evening, after the others were asleep, Rose and Hank sat by the fire. You're going to Billings to meet Creed, she said. Yes. To tell him about 74. He was quiet for a moment. He had taken the receipt out of his pocket. She had noticed not today, but yesterday morning before they rode. She had seen him standing by his horse holding it, and then she had seen him fold it again and put it back. She had not said anything. I think so, he said now. Yes. What will happen? Probably nothing legally. The statute runs out. He looked at the fire. But Creed should know. He should have the full picture. And if there are consequences, there are consequences. He paused. It was always going to come to this. You can only carry a thing so far before it gets too heavy. Or before you find somewhere to set it down, Rose said. He looked at her. You don't have to carry it anymore, she said. Not as comfort as fact. You did the thing. It's done. What comes next is what you do after it. He held her look. The fire cracked between them, sending up a brief stream of sparks that rose and cooled and vanished into the dark sky. You're remarkably direct for a schoolteacher, he said. I teach children, she said. They see through everything else. He smiled. A real one, not the shadow of one, not the almost. She had not seen it before, and she recognized it immediately as the thing that had been present behind all the others, the thing all the others had been standing in for. It changed his face completely. 3 counties over, he said again. Approximately, she said. There's a decent road from Billings, he said. I know it. I could ride that direction after. You could, she said. I'll need something to do, he said. Out here with reasonable work. I know the territory. I know the roads and the properties and the jurisdictions. He paused. I'm told Creed's office is short-staffed. You could go back to marshaling, Rose said. Or something adjacent to it, he said. Something that used what I know without requiring me to be what I was. He looked at the fire. I'm 56 years old. I'm not interested in performing anything anymore. I just want to do what's actually useful. That seems like a good plan, Rose said. I thought you might think so. They sat in comfortable quiet for a while, the fire burning down to orange coals, the Montana night enormous and dark and full of stars. She would have liked you, Hank said. My sister. She would have liked exactly the way you think. What was she like? She read Dickens, he said, and she was usually right about things. And she thought that people who'd done wrong things were still capable of doing right things, which was a more radical position than it sounds out here. He paused. She would have liked that you kept the receipt. She would have said that was the right call. Was it? Yes, he said. He reached into his pocket and he took it out, the receipt, worn and folded, and he held it in his palm for a moment. Then he folded his fingers over it. Tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow, she agreed. Did I show them? Billings was a real town, not large by Eastern standards, but substantial enough with a main street that had permanent buildings and a hotel with a sign and a marshal's office at the end of a side street that looked like it had seen considerable use. Marshal Creed was a compact gray-haired man of perhaps 60 who had the quality of someone who had spent a long time doing a difficult job and had become quiet in the way people became quiet when they had seen too much to be surprised by anything. He shook Hank's hand and offered them both chairs and listened without interruption to everything. He read the letter Rose had written. He examined the tin box. He looked at the box from Nora. Nora had given it to Rose to carry with the request that her name be kept out of it as much as possible. He read the ledger. Then Hank took the receipt out of his pocket and set it on the desk. Creed looked at it. He looked at Hank. He said nothing for a long moment. He picked up the receipt and read it. He set it back down. Statute ran out, he said. I know, Hank said. This is you clearing the record. Yes. Creed looked at him for a moment longer. Then he picked up the receipt and put it in the folder with the rest of the documents. All right, he said. Wade Colton will be here in 2 days, Hank said. And Rel comes Monday. Creed looked at his desk. This is enough to wrap up the operation entirely. The other 2 properties, we can move on those this week. He looked up. You'll be available if I need testimony. Yes, Hank said. I'm in the area. Creed looked at Rose. And you, Miss Calloway? I'll be in the territory, Rose said. I'm going to be establishing a school, approximately 3 counties over. Creed raised an eyebrow. Then he looked at Hank. Then he looked at Rose again. The town of Cross Creek has been trying to start a school for 2 years, he said. Population's grown enough to need one. They applied to the Territorial Education Office twice, but haven't had anyone willing to make the ride. How far from Billings? Rose said. 2 days east on the Clearwater Road extension. Rose looked at Hank. Hank looked at Rose. I know that road, he said. Of course you do, she said. Creed watched this exchange with the expression of a man who had seen a great many things in his long career and was comfortable adding this particular development to the list. I'll write you a letter of introduction, he said to Rose. To the town council. He picked up his pen. Then he looked at Hank. And you're not still thinking of disappearing back into that valley? It was not a question. No, Hank said. I don't think I am. Oh, no. They rode out of Billings the next morning east on the Clearwater Road. Hank on the roan he'd ridden in on Rose on a horse she'd acquired from a stable with the last of the money she'd had on her when Wade's men took her. Margaret Coyle had departed north toward a county she'd chosen from a list Creed had given her with a letter of introduction and the particular expression of a woman who had survived something terrible and had decided to be defined by what came after it rather than by the thing itself. The other 3 women were on a train to the east. The road ran between low hills through grass that was already beginning to change color at the tips as August slid toward September. The sky was almost white and clear. They rode without talking for a while, the way people rode, who were comfortable in each other's company and did not need to fill the space between them with words. Rose was making a list in her mind. It was a habit. She listed what she knew, what she didn't know, what she needed to find out. Cross Creek, population sufficient for a school. Building required, materials required, teacher required, that part she had covered. A second teacher if the town grew. She thought about what Hank had said about something adjacent to marshaling. She thought about what use a man with his knowledge of the territory would be to a marshal's office that was short-staffed. She thought about how 2 days on the same road repeated over time would become familiar. What are you thinking about? Hank said. They hadn't spoken in an hour. School supply lists, she said. Specifically whether Cross Creek is likely to have a sufficient general store or whether I'll need to arrange shipment from Billings. He considered this seriously. Cross Creek has a decent general store, he said. Owned by a woman named Havens. She can get things in from Billings with a 2-week turnaround. You've been there. Through it, and he said. Years ago. It was smaller then. Was there a school? No, there was a lot of mud and a saloon. He paused. In that order. Well, Rose said, 2 of those things might have changed. He rode in silence for a moment. I'll help, he said, with the building, if they need it. A former U.S. Marshal who mends fences carefully and knows the roads, Rose said. Cross Creek doesn't know what's coming. The almost smile was back, but behind it now was the real one she knew was there. No, he said. I suppose they don't. The road curved east through a gap in the hills, and ahead of them, the land opened into a wider valley, and somewhere beyond it, 2 days out, there was a town waiting to become something, and a room that would be a classroom, and children who didn't know yet what they were going to learn. Rose Calloway straightened in the saddle. Hank Mercer rode beside her. The Montana morning was clear and vast and entirely itself, and they rode into it together, and the road went on. Bilitam Sikam. 1 month later, the territorial newspaper out of Billings ran a short item on the inside page. Wade Colton, formerly of the city, has been charged in Yellowstone County with multiple counts of fraud, trafficking, and conspiracy. Marshal A. Creed reports that cooperative testimony has been secured from multiple parties. The matter is expected to conclude at trial in November. Separately, the town of Cross Creek in Garfield County has announced the establishment of its first schoolhouse to open in October. The teacher of record 1R Calloway, formerly of Columbus, Ohio, is accepting enrollment. Rose read the item at the kitchen table of the small house she'd been given. Beside the school building, which was still being finished, she could hear the hammering from here, could hear the particular cadence of it that she had come to recognize. She set the paper down and looked out the window at the October sky. She thought about Margaret Coyle, who was north in a different county, teaching 20 children in a building that had been a storage shed 3 months ago. She thought about Nora Vance, who had written twice short letters, practical reporting that Dex had given his testimony and was waiting on the outcome, and that the baby was moving now, and they had decided to name her Alice. She thought about the receipt that was somewhere in a marshal's folder in Billings, stripped of its weight by the act of surrender, becoming just a piece of paper among papers. She thought about the road east from Billings. The hammering stopped. A moment later, boots on the porch steps and the door opened. East wall's done, Hank said. West wall tomorrow if the lumber arrives. It'll arrive, Rose said. Mrs. Haven said Thursday. He came in and poured himself water from the pitcher on the counter and drank it, standing up, looking out the same window she'd been looking out. He'd taken on work for Creed's office, not full marshaling as he'd said, but the adjacent kind, consulting on territorial property matters, helping to identify the properties and networks that the Colton case had revealed. It kept him in the territory. It kept him useful. School opens in 2 weeks, Rose said. I know. 14 children enrolled so far. I heard. He set the cup down. He turned. You'll need more desks. I know. She looked at him. Can you make desks? I've never made a desk, he said, but I can make things that hold weight and stay flat. That's probably close enough. She smiled. It's exactly what a desk needs to be, she said. He looked at her for a moment, the full look, the one that didn't deflect. Rose, he said. Hank, she said. I'm glad you were in that grass, he said. That's a terrible thing to be glad about, and I'm glad about it anyway. You should be glad I cut the rope, she said. That was the important part. I'm glad about that too, he said, considerably. The October light came in low and gold through the window of the little house in Cross Creek, and outside the schoolhouse was almost ready. And somewhere north, a young woman who had been lost was teaching children who would grow up remembering her name. And somewhere in a marshal's office, a piece of paper was slowly becoming just paper. And somewhere in a town that used to be mostly mud, a man who had spent 8 years hiding from the shape of himself was doing the next right thing. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that was everything. So tell me, friend, if you've ever had to choose between carrying the past and building something new, which did you choose? Leave your answer below and ride with us again next time. Subscribe so you don't miss where the road takes us. Out here, the best stories always start just past the next hill. Asterisk.